truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Monday, March 25th, 2024, the 1160th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. So on Friday, we talked about how the Lincoln Project and various other uniparty communists want to make asset seizure great again. They want to steal Trump's buildings. I mean, confiscate them. Since Donald Trump can't come up with the nearly $600 million they wanted him to pay in order to appeal a terrible and unjust decision in a case that should have never been brought in the first place because there was no crime, no victims, and even the supposed victims agreed that there was no crime and that Donald Trump's conduct in their shared business was completely above board. And so the media ran with that theme throughout the weekend. We heard about how Donald Trump was going to have his buildings taken away, and to the extent that his real estate empire, the buildings with his name on them, his unique and historic properties, to the extent that those represent part of Donald Trump's brand and his identity. Part of Donald Trump's identity is his real estate empire. To the extent that that's true, and it is in the minds of virtually everyone, then taking away those properties chips away at Donald Trump's brand. It's like his power is being removed piece by piece, and all of these regime communists love to watch that. They have been trying for exactly that for nearly 9 years now. Again, middle of June, 9 years since Trump came down the escalator. You could find piece after piece this morning celebrating Donald Trump's day of judgment. Oh, they're going to tell him they're taking Seven Springs, or they're taking Trump Tower, or they're taking 40 Wall Street, or they might even take Mar-a-Lago. But that's only worth $18 million. Well, one of the most entertaining pieces was written by the author of the Color Revolution playbook himself, Norm Eisen of the Brookings Institution. This was over at CNN this morning. In fact, it's still on the front page of CNN.com, despite the fact that it has already proven false. So I guess it was true this morning, but now it is actually dis, or malinformation. The headline, Trump's facing a legal 1-2 punch, by Norm Eisen and a man named Andrew Warren, who CNN.com describes as, quote, the duly elected state attorney in Hillsborough County, Florida. And you might say that's a little weird. Why are they highlighting the fact that he is duly elected? And that's because Andrew Warren is the state prosecutor in Florida who was removed by Meatball Ron. But let's see what these commies say. Contrary to the popular view that former President Donald Trump has successfully delayed accountability, this week he's facing a 1-2 punch that has the potential to inflict lasting damage. All signs are that the New York criminal case brought by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg will be confirmed imminently for a start date in April after a short pause occasioned by a last-minute federal document dump. And the civil judgment already won by New York Attorney General Letitia James is moving briskly as well, with the AG apparently set to begin seizing Trump properties as soon as Monday. And that would be today. This week promises to be an inflection point in both cases. Oh, sounds like it's going to be bad for Trump. In the Bragg case, Trump is charged with covering up hush money payments he made to Stormy Daniels to keep voters from knowing about their alleged affair out of fears that it would harm his 2016 presidential campaign. Trump has pleaded not guilty and denies the affair. So, by the way, does Stormy Daniels. And Stormy Daniels actually owes Donald Trump about $600,000. And of course, Norm Eisen knows all of that. The case had been set for trial on March 25th when a last-minute flood of thousands of documents from the files of federal prosecutors in response to a Trump subpoena led the judge to postpone the trial to mid-April and schedule an evidentiary hearing on what happened to commence Monday. Despite some not unusual hiccups and characteristically vigorous delay efforts from the Trump team, we expect the hearing to conclude with an April trial date intact. If we are correct about that, Trump could face a criminal jury in what has been, quote, an important case for democracy, end quote, since the grand jury filed charges nearly a year ago. And the claim that this is an important case for democracy links to an article by Norm Eisen and corrupt former Nixon White House counsel John Dean. So the author of all these efforts, Norm Eisen, who has essentially written the playbook for all of these various prosecutions and indictments, he says this is an important case for democracy, and he is linking to his own article to support making that claim again. Back to the article. We think the details of the dispute suggest the trial date will not materially move again. On March 8th, Trump accused the DEA of discovery violations and worse, such as the patently absurd suggestion of working with Daniels to, quote, hide the release of her upcoming documentary. Trump asked the court yet again to dismiss the indictment following earlier unsuccessful efforts, or in the alternative, to preclude Daniels and Michael Cohen, his former lawyer and fixer, from testifying, which he had already previously tried and failed to do. He also sought a 90-day adjournment to review the newly produced records. The DA's office quickly agreed to a 30-day adjournment as sufficient to allow Trump, as well as the DA's office, to review the well over 100,000-page production by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The court granted this request. Then last week, the DA's office informed the court that the vast majority of this material was immaterial or duplicative. And what that means essentially is that it is irrelevant to this case and or a copy of something that they already had prior. As criminal law practitioners with more than half a century of experience and many trials between us, the 30-day adjournment already in effect seems more than sufficient to allow Trump a meaningful opportunity to review the materials in advance of trial. The DA contends that the vast majority of the records are irrelevant and that after initial review, the important materials constituted fewer than 270 documents relating to one of the key witnesses, Cohen. So, from the prosecution side, all of these 100,000 pages, they've gone through them. They don't matter. They're copies. They're not relevant to this case. But that's only from one side. They can make that argument, but the other side is allowed to make arguments too. The DA makes a fair point with his emphatic pushback against Trump's allegations of discovery violations. Trump, and to an extent the SDNY, appears to be responsible for the timing of the production, not the DA. The DA asked SDNY for a substantial production of documents over a year ago. SDNY held back many documents. Then Trump waited until just a few months before trial before deciding to subpoena the materials, and SDNY then let loose the flood. The DA is hardly to be blamed for that. Well, that doesn't matter. Who cares? who's to blame for it. It just matters that it's happening and that Donald Trump gets to review all of that material. Why aren't the people who say that they're protecting our institutions and protecting democracy and protecting the rule of law, why aren't they more invested in seeing this case reach its proper conclusion based on evidence and like legal precedent and, the Constitution, rather than just continuing to push for it to be expedited as quickly as possible and Trump to just be railroaded into going broke and going to prison based on all of these trumped up charges? On this record, we tend to agree with the DA that enough is enough and that it is time to proceed to trial. Judge Juan Merchan is quite properly allowing Trump to have a hearing and ventilate his concerns. That is quite an interesting choice of words, but it appears that all of the documents have now been produced, and we think that the hearing slated to begin Monday will be followed by a prompt order to proceed to trial. Some say that this case, too, serves as an example of Trump's success at delaying prosecution against him. But if, as we expect, the trial begins in or around mid-April, that ploy will have failed. Oh, we're going to beat Trump again. Sure you are. But that is only part of the legal trouble Trump faced last week. The second blow comes from the office of the New York Attorney General in the aftermath of her successful civil prosecution of Trump, his sons Don Jr. and Eric, and other Trump Organization businesses and former executives who contested the allegations. In February, following a 2-month trial that ended in December with closing arguments in January, Judge Arthur Engeron brought down the hammer with a $354,868,768 judgment against Trump for a decade's worth of lies at his organization. Yes, the Trump Organization did nothing but lie constantly for 10 years. These people are absolutely insane. With interest, Trump's final bill was approximately $454 million. Trump apparently approached about 30 companies to secure this vast sum, but found no takers. On March 18th, Trump's lawyers told the court that it was a practical impossibility to secure such a large bond. They asked the court for a stay or to allow a bond of $100 million. The AG's office responded that there is no legal justification for a stay, and Trump can secure multiple smaller bonds to satisfy his judgment. Setting aside the logistical hurdles of ponying up nearly $500 million cash, whether directly or by obtaining a bond secured by illiquid assets, the practical reality is that the consequences of Engeron's fraud ruling are starting to take hold. Raising this money is not going to be easy. Trump had 30 days to satisfy the February 16th judgment, and as of Monday, time is up. James has been prepared for this possibility. Shortly after the court's ruling, James said she would be prepared to take the appropriate steps to enforce the judgment, including seizing Trump's assets to ensure that he pays his debt to the state of New York. And isn't that amazing? Donald Trump did not commit a crime. The loans were paid back with interest, and the banks were happy about all of the business they did with the Trump Organization. And yet, these communists are suggesting that Donald Trump has an over $500 million debt to the state of New York. A debt. Again, Norm Eisen is not some confused MSNBC viewer. He is one of the people responsible for creating these strategies and creating the justifications for these various efforts to get Trump. He knows the ins and outs of these situations. Consider the level of depravity and dishonesty required to claim that a man has a debt he certainly does not have, an unjust debt, obviously, based on the facts. Norm Eisen does not care. This is what it means to have a two-tiered system of justice. Donald Trump threatens their grip on power. He threatens their structure and their system. Therefore, he is a criminal regardless of whether or not he has broken any of their rules. They will find a way so that it looks like they are justified in punishing him. And there is some portion of the population that will agree with them because they hate Donald Trump and they hate his supporters. If we are able to restore some sense of justice to this society, you would have to expect that this is going to come back around to haunt Norm Eisen, and you have to hope it will. As promised, James is doing exactly that. Last week, she filed what is in effect a blanket lien on Trump's property in Westchester County, New York, including his Seven Springs property that was one subject of his fraud trial. The court concluded the Trump Organization valued Seven Springs on its books at $161 million, despite several appraisals putting the value between $5.5 to $21 million. Now, again, several appraisals that Norm Eisen just pulls out of somewhere do not matter at all. They don't have any bearing on the actual value of Trump's properties. The actual value of these properties is what they could be sold for in a normal market, and he has already had bankers and real estate experts come to his defense on the values of these properties. In an interview, James also suggested that she was eyeing a Manhattan property, 40 Wall Street. She does not have far to look. It is adjacent to her office, and she has stated that she sees it every day. It was appraised in 2015 at $540 million, although the Trump Organization inflated its value by nearly $200 million more. Moreover, as CNN has reported, a judgment has been entered as the first step in seizing Trump's real estate assets in New York City, where 40 Wall Street is among his various high-profile properties. And I know that a lot of this is rehashing issues we've discussed before, but I also think it's really important to get the exact framing from a person like Norm Eisen, who is plotting how these things are going to go in the future. He is seeding narratives and telling people what to expect, and not only what to expect, but what to push for and argue for and hope for, which also makes it so that when those expectations are not met, the people who are actually representing the oppressors in this situation, they will all feel like victims of an injustice being done to them. So let's close this out. Trump's immediate dilemma is how to come up with the money. Options include following the AG's advice and securing multiple bonds, borrowing money from a foreign government. Saudi Arabia and Russia have been mentioned as possible creditors, or declaring bankruptcy. And there you have it once again. We discussed this possibility last week, that potentially this money situation was going to introduce a new Russiagate hoax. Sounds like that is exactly where Norm Eisen is intending to go. He's got Saudi Arabia in the mix. I suspect at some point they will bring back the story of the mythical Jamal Khashoggi, and that story will blow up in their faces. They're going to try to go after Mohammed bin Salman in the same way they've been framing Vladimir Putin. That isn't going to work, but these are great hints about where they're going. His social media company recently concluded a merger with Digital World Acquisition Corporation, which could provide him with the financial infusion he needs, although he would have to get special permission from the board of that entity to sell or borrow against his equity. But of course, he doesn't need it. The bottom line, however, is that the New York Attorney General is likely to continue putting liens on Trump's properties. And though she likely won't evict Trump from his 30,000 square foot Trump Tower apartment, which we now know is actually 10,996 square feet, immediately, even Trump has recognized that he may have to sell his great assets at fire sale prices. So again, Donald Trump, he's inflating the size of his apartment. It's not 30,000 square feet. It's 10,996 square feet. That's what we now know. Donald Trump was just inflating himself to inflate his ego again, as he's been doing for 40 years. These people are absolutely deranged. But they just need to keep feeding their audience this stuff, because the audience is now totally deranged as well. They think Trump has told tens of thousands of lies and committed hundreds or thousands of crimes, despite not being able to describe any of them. And at the same time, they tell us that Joe Biden is squeaky clean. There's no evidence, baseless claims. The commonality between the criminal and civil cases in New York goes beyond the timing of these latest developments. Bragg has long articulated that his case is about corrupting an election, that is, allegedly perpetrating a fraud on the voters. That is a logical successor to the financial fraud found in the New York Attorney General's case, and a logical precursor to the conspiracies to unlawfully change the outcome of the 2020 election alleged in the D.C. and Georgia prosecutions. So you see, these were all laid out in a particular order. One will build off the last, and that will create a narrative. And this is one of those points at which it is very strange to consider that so many people who are still on our side, maybe a little black-pilled, maybe legitimately frustrated, they end up thinking there is no plan and that all of this is just kind of happening randomly in real time. You can see from their side that's not true. Now, the global governing bodies, the World Economic Forum, the WHO, the United Nations, they have all of these agendas together that they publish on their websites. They go out and hold conferences. They give speeches about them. They write books about various aspects of the agenda. They tell us what's going on now, what came before, and what is going to happen in the future so that we are prepared to believe them at all times. They tell us their plans. They tell us that the future they plan for us is inevitable so that we will simply accept it and understand it when it arrives. That's what Norm Eisen is doing right here. He's saying, yeah, we laid out all of these cases so that they would take a narrative form. We have this first fraud, you see, he's guilty of that, which means he's a guy that frauds. So then we'll give you a second fraud. Oh, he's that guy too. And he was trying to deceive people in the course of an election. And so we've concocted this novel legal theory to make this actually about campaign violations, despite the fact that the FEC has already said, no, that's not it. But when you understand he's definitely committed this one fraud that we haven't proven and that will be overturned on appeal, he's also definitely committed this other fraud that hasn't been proven and will be overturned on appeal. And because he's committed those two frauds, that means he also tried to get Georgia officials to commit fraud. And when that didn't work, he called his supporters to the Capitol for a very violent insurrection. And they're going to lay out that case for the American public one after the other. And it's going to take this narrative form just as Norm Eisen and associates have designed it. And of course, if they have a plan and they tell everybody about their plan, which is exactly what happens, then you should expect that there is a plan formulated in response to that. And even understanding that might be giving these people too much of the benefit of the doubt because it suggests that they are the ones dictating events right now. The article wraps up this way. Whatever delays may be present in those jurisdictions or in Florida's Mar-a-Lago documents case, in New York, the former president is facing serious hits. To our mind, he is not dodging legal accountability. It has backed him into a corner and appears ready to land a hard punch, maybe even a knockout. Good luck, Norm. So that was CNN at 6 a.m. Eastern, back when everything looked so hopeful for Norm Eisen. Maybe they're going to take Trump's buildings. Well, this is Bloomberg a few hours later. Trump bond cut by 68% to $175 million as he appeals New York fine. A New York appeals court agreed to slash the amount of the bond Donald Trump must post to cover a $454 million civil fraud verdict while he appeals it, reducing it to just $175 million after the real estate mogul claimed he'd have to sell properties at a loss to raise cash. The ruling Monday comes as Trump faces a deadline on the same day to either pay the fine or post a bond for 120% of the judgment to put it on hold while he appeals. That would have amounted to nearly $545 million. He has 10 days to post the bond, the court ruled. The decision means Trump may be able to push ahead with his appeal without the risk of his assets being seized by New York Attorney General Letitia James for lack of payment. So Donald Trump said on Friday, I believe, on Truth Social, that he has $500 million cash in hand right now. They spent a few weeks pitching the notion that Donald Trump was actually broke. He wasn't going to be able to pay this bond. Letitia James was going to start stealing his buildings. All the little commies clapped in unison. Oh, we're finally going to take these little pieces of Donald Trump away. Maybe there was never going to be a silver bullet that finally stopped him. Maybe we were just going to take him apart piece by piece, and now that's finally started. Now, commies, it's not going to work that way either. You're just not going to get Trump. It's not going to happen. And so while $175 million to put up just to allow for an appeal, while that is totally absurd and still represents a blatant violation of the Eighth Amendment and then a violation of the First Amendment, there is no longer any question about whether Donald Trump is going to fail to put up this bond. Trump addressed all of this on Truth Social this morning. Judge Engoron has refused to obey the decision of the appellate division relative to the statute of limitations. This is a confrontation between a judge and those that rule above him. A very bad situation in which to place New York State and the rule of law. Engoron has disrespected the appellate division and its very clear and precise ruling. He should be made to do so and at the same time release the gag order. This is the fifth time in this case that he has been overturned, a record. His credibility and that of Letitia James has been shattered. We will abide by the decision of the appellate division and post either a bond, equivalent securities, or cash. This also shows how ridiculous and outrageous Engoron's original decision was at $450 million. I did nothing wrong, and New York should never be put in a position like this again. Businesses are fleeing, violent crime is flourishing, and it is very important that this be resolved in its totality as soon as possible. Thank you. He went on. Judge Engoron and Letitia James should be forced to explain why he ruled that Mar-a-Lago was worth $18 million when, in fact, it is worth from 50 to 100 times that amount. How did the Attorney General of the state of New York force this corrupt judge to do that in order to help her narrative, and why? Sounds like a mystery. Trump said this outside the court today.
Thank you very much. Judge Engoron has done a terrible disservice to the state of New York. What he's done is terrible. Businesses are fleeing, and you see that. We just released a statement on Truth. Businesses are fleeing and crime is flourishing all over the state, and what he's done is such a disservice and should never be allowed to happen again. New York State is being battered by his decision. So I greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and I'll post either $175 million in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days. And I thank the appellate division for acting quickly. But Judge Engoron is a disgrace to this country, and this should not be allowed to happen. Thank you very much. Would you accept foreign money to pay the bond?
And of course, you got someone in the fake news or maybe some kind of Trump deranged lunatic out there in the peanut gallery asking if Trump accepted foreign money in order to pay the bond. So once again, we are headed in that direction. They said Donald Trump was broke. He was going to be too broke to pay this judgment. They were going to take his buildings. None of that is true, and it has already all proven false based on the developments today. So Norm Eisen is seeding narratives about what his plan is. His plan just continues to fail at every step, and then he has to rewrite the plan and convince everybody, no, it's fine. We're still totally on track. And the funny thing is that is what we always get accused of doing. People hear that something terrible is going on, being done to Trump supporters, and we say, okay, we get it, but that's actually not as bad as it looks, and it's going to come around to work to our benefit in the future. And they say, oh, that's hopium. Donald Trump doesn't have a plan. There's nothing happening. This is just an evil regime persecuting and prosecuting and propagandizing and censoring its political opposition. They're exerting this illegitimate power. They are coming after us all. And sooner or later, they're going to get us because nothing is going in our way. Just look at this. Right now, we're losing our Republican Congress that was going to save us. And they say that we are dealing in hopium to tell people that, no, that's not actually the direction this is going. And people hold on to that view even while they can see the enemy's plan falling apart. And that is what it's doing. Norm Eisen this morning was gleeful about the possibility that Letitia James might take Trump's properties. And hey, maybe in the future that'll happen. Maybe they'll figure out a way that they can do that, and we'll get the optics of that. And all good. Let's have the optics of these commies stealing people's real estate. That'll be great. Even Frank Luntz knows that that's going to look bad for the communists. But as of right now, it looks like that particular plan has blown up in their faces. At the very least, they have led their audience, the child brains out there, the uniparty left villagers, they have led them to a point where they have all these expectations built up. And once again, their expectations are totally dashed. They get none of what they wanted. Imagine what it would have been like last August, middle of August last year, and you had all these Trump indictments come out. And finally, this Fani Willis RICO case, middle of August 2023. You got all these indictments, 91 indictments. Trump's going to spend 700 years in jail. Imagine being a supporter of the Uniparty at that point and believing all of the people on TV as they're talking about how Donald Trump is finally going down. Donald Trump's going to go to prison. Donald Trump has committed all these crimes. But no, he hasn't. They invented novel legal theories. They applied novel interpretations of Civil War era Reconstruction Amendment law. And it's all falling apart. These people have nothing. And what are they doing? They're doubling down again, and they're raising those expectations up again. Also, we can update on what is being called the hush money trial, which makes it sound as though Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels actually had an affair, despite the fact that both of them deny it. Within the last half hour or so, CNN publishes judge will allow defense to file additional motion to delay hush money trial. Judge Juan Merchan is allowing former President Donald Trump's attorneys in his hush money trial to file a motion Monday on grounds of pretrial publicity and will allow the district attorney's office 1 week to respond. Shortly before the hearing ended, Trump's defense began arguing again for an adjournment over pretrial publicity, saying they were prepared to file a motion on Monday requesting the delay. The district attorney's office responded that, quote, pretrial publicity has been caused and exacerbated by the defendant, end quote, and said it's prepared to oppose the defense motion if one is allowed. Earlier, Merchan said the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is not at fault for the late production of documents from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Jury selection will take place the week before Passover, and all prospective jurors will be informed court will not convene on any date juror is unable to attend for religious observance. The judge indicated he may adjourn the trial for the start of Passover, which will fall in the second week of trial. Now, I don't know if it's a customary thing in New York to delay trials for Passover, but hey, it's 2024. So jury selection is set to begin April 15th, and that'll be the season premiere of the new season of Get Trump New York, Donald Trump versus Stormy Daniels. You'll remember the season 1 finale was Stormy Daniels' lawyer Michael Avenatti going to prison for fraud. But prior to that, back during season 1, there were people like Bill Maher and all of the Trump deranged, quote unquote, intellectuals who thought that Michael Avenatti should be the Democrat candidate for president in 2020. But despite that, these are the very smart people. They're the public intellectuals we need to pay a lot of attention to. There was actually a great clip from Real Time with Bill Maher on Friday where he and his guests expressed their confusion about how Donald Trump just keeps getting lucky on all of this.
No, he actually just got this guy is the luckiest guy in the world, but Trump Social, Trump Social, but Truth Social just got permission to go public.
Right.
And so his stake, because it's a meme stock, a little like GameStop, is worth $3.5 billion right now, and it could go higher if people bid it up. So.
He definitely made a deal with the devil at
something.
Because he always lucks out on everything.
Yeah.
He has the best enemies. Look at Michael Avenatti. Look at Fani Willis now in Georgia. The best enemies.
Right.
It helps him so much.
And Merrick Garland fucked it all up. He's dithered for... Now we're probably not even going to see any of the trials. He just always lucks his way into everything.
That is Trump derangement on display. So that was Bill Maher, Kara Swisher, who is some sort of Silicon Valley tech expert and podcast host. Beto O'Rourke was there, somehow silent throughout this, and then some lady I've never seen. But that lady was the only one who seemed to even be connected to reality at all. Trump does have terrible enemies, but it's those people on that panel who inflate Trump's enemies only to then see them fail spectacularly in public. They never actually question any of the underlying information that these Trump enemies are pushing. They think all of that is true, and these particular people who are tasked with getting Trump are just incompetent. They are doing an insufficient job of getting Trump based on all of this totally legitimate and relevant information. They never suspect that actually all of them are just wrong because they are not only being lied to, which they can't understand, they are then telling everyone else lies, and then they are all agreeing to support that same set of lies, because if any of them are wrong, then all of them are wrong. So all of them basically have to agree with all of it. Their stupidity and derangement are self-reinforcing. Kara Swisher, as the tech authority on that panel, she's the one that they actually look for. Oh, you know what's going on with Truth Social. Ha ha ha. It's like a meme stock. It's not anything serious. And they have allowed Donald Trump's company to be listed on the NASDAQ, like they all did him a favor. Trump just got lucky again. Why doesn't she talk about the years of interference and delays, all the obstacles they tried to lay out in front of him? Why doesn't she reference any of that? It's only Donald Trump got lucky. He was allowed to do this. And of course, all of the people who might invest in this company, they're very stupid. They're all rubes. They're going to get taken for a ride. The stock ticker DJT is expected to be listed tomorrow. And then at that point, we will see how the markets react and how Trump stock does. But even CNN this morning had to admit that news of the merger's completion propelled shares of Digital World 21% higher on Monday. At current prices, Trump's stake is valued at $3.5 billion. However, there are lockup restrictions that would prevent Trump from selling or even borrowing against the value of that stock for months. And that last part, of course, is true. But the real issue ultimately is how the market responds. Now, Donald Trump just came out to give a statement at his 40 Wall Street building. Here is that statement. It's going to play for about 9 minutes. So if you've already heard it or don't want to hear it, you can skip ahead to about the 45, 46 minute mark, and you should be nearing the end of his comments.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be with you at 40 Wall Street. And we appreciate you have a lot of press outside, and I think we're going to start before a lot of them come in, which frankly always makes me happy. So, a lot of things happened today. This is all about election interference. This is all Biden-run things, meaning Biden and his thugs, because I don't know if he knows he's alive. And it's a shame. It's a shame what's happening to our country. This is election interference. They are doing things that have never been done in this country before. We've never had anything like it, certainly not at this level, but we've really had nothing like it that I've been able to find. It does happen a lot in third world countries, banana republics. If you look at what we just left, you have a case which they're dying to get this thing started. The judge cannot go faster. He wants to get it started so badly. And there's tremendous corruption. You have Pomerantz, Mark Pomerantz. He was Hillary Clinton's lawyer, or Democrat National Committee's lawyer. He worked in Paul Weiss. He walked in and he took over the district attorney's office. Nobody's ever seen anything like that, to prosecute Trump. And then they wouldn't do what he wanted to do, and he goes out and he writes a book. Long before any decisions were made, he writes a book about it. And the book gets published, and everybody's reading his book. And the judge said there's nothing wrong with that. And if you look at Bragg had a fit over that. Bragg said this trial is now dead. We can't do the trial. Well, that was one of the problems, and the judge should have allowed that to happen. And you had other instances like Colangelo. Colangelo is a radical left from the DOJ who was put into the state working with Letitia James, and then was put into the district attorney's office to run the trial against Trump. And that was done by Biden and his thugs also, because they can't win an election because of the borders, because of energy prices, because of inflation, because of Afghanistan, the worst and most embarrassing day in the history of our country. He can't win because of Russia, because of all the problems, because of Ukraine being attacked by Russia. And he can't win because of the October 7th attack of Israel, which he should have never allowed to happen. Would have never happened if I were president. Ukraine would have never been attacked if I was president. And you wouldn't have inflation if I was president. We didn't have inflation. So all of these things, so what they do is they do election interference, which is court cases, and let's try and tie him up, and let's take as much of his money as possible. I respect the appellate division for substantially reducing that ridiculous amount of money that was put on by a corrupt judge named Engoron. He ought to be looked at, seriously looked at, especially what he did with valuations. He's the one, he's a fraudulent valuator, where he values Mar-a-Lago at $18 million, and people say it's worth 50 to 100 times that much, the biggest experts in the business. So he ought to be looked at, and James ought to be looked at, because she tried to get him. She's like the puppet master of the judge. And, you know, our state, this state, is losing tremendous prestige. It's losing its companies. It's losing its people. They're fleeing, and violent crime is flourishing. And we can't have that. We can't have that. No city should have that. And it's happening in other cities, but not with the lawfare. The lawfare that they're doing is incredible. So they could have done this in the case of the trial that we just left, one of the many that are going. Every single one of them is run by Biden and his thugs. It's the only way they think they can get elected. And I think so far it's backfiring, because the people of this country understand it. It's backfiring. But they're being run, and they're running all of these different cases. So ridiculous, the cases. Every one of them is ridiculous. You take a look at any one of them, and you say any one of them, it wouldn't make any difference. This is all weaponization of DOJ and FBI. They raided my house in violation of a thing called the Fourth Amendment. Not allowed to do that. They raided my house in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. No notice, no nothing. They raided it. I can't believe it. Nobody can believe it. And we'll see how that all works out in the end. But it's illegal what they're doing. It's criminal what they're doing. And it's never been done before in this country. You can't have an election in the middle of a political season. We just had Super Tuesday, and we had a Tuesday after a Tuesday already, and we had Louisiana the other day, a couple of days ago, and we won in a record number, the highest number ever recorded. But we're in the middle of an election right now, and we're fighting crooked Joe Biden, who's the worst president in the history of our country, by far, who's let this country go to hell. The borders, millions and millions of people coming in from prisons, from mental institutions. They're terrorists. Many people coming in from prisons and mental institutions. Think of it. And terrorists are coming into our country. And this guy's just letting them come in by the millions. I think we have 15 million people already. People don't say that. I say it. And I'll bet I'm right, too. So we're going through this weaponization of our government to try and knock out somebody's political opponent. And so far, based on the polls, it's not working at all. The people understand it. We have a man who just ruled he'd like the trial to start in 21 days or something. And I don't know how you can have a trial that's going on right in the middle of an election. Not fair. Not fair. It's not fair at all. He knows that, too. He's a Democrat judge. He wants to do that because they're all trying to damage Trump as much as possible. It's having the reverse effect, but maybe someday it won't. I don't know. But it's having the reverse effect. It's a terrible, terrible precedent, a terrible thing to do. They could have started this when I left office. You could have gone back 3 years, more than that. When I left office, all of these things could have been started, so we wouldn't be quibbling over starting this week or that week or 2 days or 3 days. It wouldn't have mattered. This thing would have been over 2 years ago. They could have started. They should have never started, because there's no case. If you read Andy McCarthy's piece, if you read Jonathan Turley's piece, if you read legal scholars all over the world, they say this DA case is a hoax and it's something that shouldn't have. It's not even a crime. They say there's no crime, and there is no crime. So I just say it's a sad day for this country when you have something like this. And remember the words, should have been started 3 years ago if they were going to start it at all. And then you wouldn't be quibbling over what week it's going to, in days. They're quibbling over days and hours. They wouldn't be quibbling at all. They never started it. And you know why they didn't start it? Because they didn't know I'd be running, and they didn't know how well I'd do. And if I were not running, or if I were doing poorly like everyone else has done, because they're all gone, they're all knocked out except for crooked Joe Biden. If I were doing poorly, this wouldn't be happening. None of these trials would have been happening. If I wasn't running, they wouldn't be happening. So it's a sad day in our country in many respects, but the good day is that the appellate division was fair. It's a lot of money still, but the judge is corrupt, in my opinion. He's the most overturned judge. He's been overturned 5 times in this case alone. He ruled against me before he even knew anything about the case. He ruled against me. The whole case was all about damages, and there were no damages. And perhaps you'll get him to tell you about what took place in terms of a settlement negotiation, because those weren't the numbers he was discussing. Those weren't the numbers. It's a disgrace what's happening in our country, and we have to get our country back, and we're going to get our country back. That's what's going to happen. November 5th, I believe, will be the most important day in the history of our country. We'll get these people out of there, and we'll seal up the borders, and we'll, as I say, drill, baby, drill. We'll be drilling. We'll get energy costs down. We'll get rid of the ridiculous electric car mandate, so nobody's ever heard of anything so foolish and so stupid. And we'll bring crime back to law and order. We're going to get those words law and order back, because our cities are a disaster. Greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and we will abide by that. We'll put up cash or bond very quickly, securities, cash or bond, whatever it is. We'll put it up very quickly, and we'll win the case.
Trump's attorney then gets up and makes some remarks, and then Donald Trump takes some questions. If you want to hear that exchange, you can go to the Telegram info stream, t.me/veryreasonable. Click the little magnifying glass, the search icon, and type in Trump takes questions. You should see the video in the results. But Trump right there correctly mentions that this constitutes election interference. That is why all of this is happening. What they are trying to do is make it impossible for Donald Trump to run. And since they can't really do that, they're trying to convince the public that Donald Trump should not be allowed to run, that Donald Trump has broken laws, that he is dangerous, that whatever he plans to do in his next term as president would be a threat to our society just across the board. There is no way we can allow this to happen. And they have to convince everybody that everybody else knows there's no way we can allow this to happen. I have said many times that right now we cannot just assume that the results as reported represent a legitimate or even real counting of the votes cast for either candidate. When you can't rely on the actual tally of votes, then the election just becomes a battle of narratives. And of course, the election is always, only ever a battle of narratives, because even in a situation where the votes are legitimate and properly counted, those votes would then represent a result that reflects the victory in a battle of narratives. So at best and at worst, our elections are a battle of narratives. That is what they are attempting to win through all of these prosecutions of Donald Trump. And it is quite clear that they are not working. They're not working on a real level, and they're not working on a narrative level. Now, they're not going to work on a real level because they're not real. But even if somehow they were, and all of these trials ended in the worst possible results for Donald Trump, they are still illegitimate and would be overturned on appeal. And that will happen if Donald Trump wins. It won't happen if Donald Trump doesn't win. And winning in this sense cannot be referred to as the reported results of an election. The win will only be in a battle of narratives. This is fifth generational informational warfare. It is a battle for hearts and minds, a battle that the regime is losing across the board and across the world. All of this is converging around the same timeline. And as we discussed on Devolution Power Hour the other night, there's no way that we can know exactly how any of this is going to end, but we can understand that we are moving in consistently the right direction. We don't know exactly where the path may lead, but we know which direction we have to walk down the path, and we see what's coming in the other direction. So let's shift here to the current state of election interference. This is from the Daily Signal on Friday. This state lawmaker sues to take down Biden's election meddling executive order. A federal lawsuit in one of this year's biggest battleground states challenges President Joe Biden's executive order aimed at driving up the vote in what one government watchdog calls, quote, arguably the most important election integrity lawsuit in the country. State Representative Dawn Keefer, a Republican who chairs the conservative Pennsylvania Freedom Caucus, is the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit. Keefer and other state legislators assert that Biden's executive order, as well as separate actions by the administration of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, usurped the lawmakers' authority. And of course, Josh Shapiro usurped the lawmakers' authority in the 2020 election cycle while he was the attorney general, and has done that since, including and especially in 2022, when Josh Shapiro became the illegitimate governor of Pennsylvania through a stolen election. Lawyers for the Biden and Shapiro administrations have moved for dismissal of the case known as Keefer et al. V. Biden et al., arguing that the lawmakers lack standing and that executive actions on elections at the state level already were authorized by the Pennsylvania legislature. State legislators have rights granted to them in the Constitution, so we do have standing in federal court. The irreparable harm is that they are changing the way elections are being facilitated, Keefer told the Daily Signal. Now we may have authorized them to take action. We never authorized them to break the law. The lawsuit, seeking a preliminary injunction to immediately halt the implementation of the executive order, is the only lawsuit challenging the executive order, according to a group providing legal representation. Some of the 24 other plaintiffs are not Freedom Caucus members, and not all Freedom Caucus members are plaintiffs. Keefer, who represents parts of York County and was first elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2016, is chairwoman of the House's State Government Subcommittee on Campaign Finance and Elections. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania, contends that Biden's executive order directing federal agencies to work with private, nonprofit groups in get-out-the-vote efforts violates Act 88, a state law preventing private dollars from funding election administration. The Pennsylvania General Assembly passed the measure partly in response to grants to local and state election offices in 2020, originating with donations from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, that critics say drove up the vote in Democrat-dominated areas, and that is exactly what the Center for Tech and Civic Life had as its mission. They paid off election officials all across the country, but particularly in the quote-unquote blue cities, in order to create Democrat votes for Joe Biden in the 2020 election cycle. There is a great quote from Keefer in this article. She says, "They are saying these agencies must engage in voter registration because it is a constitutional right to vote. Well, it's also your constitutional right to own a firearm. Are you helping that person to own a firearm to make sure they can exercise their Second Amendment right?" And that's a good point. So the lawsuit argues that state legislators are the ones put in the position of creating election law in their individual states. That is, according to the U.S. Constitution. Now, the Supreme Court just decided in Moore versus Harper that while the state legislatures are the place for election law to be made, they don't have total authority over the election laws that they make. They still are subject to judicial review within the state, and then, of course, ultimately by the Supreme Court. But that doesn't mean that the other branches of state government are eligible to make election law, and that's the problem here. Joe Biden is initiating an election-related program trying to send federal money to various quasi-private organizations in states to drive up their voter registration, and governors like Josh Shapiro are doing the same things. The complaint argues voter registration drives and get-out-the-vote efforts are a federally recognized private function, not a government function. But Biden's executive order requires agencies to develop plans for government-sponsored voter registration drives run by federal agencies and undisclosed third-party organizations. This is all according to Biden Executive Order 14019. Which is every bit as illegitimate as the president in the first place, but will nonetheless be the subject of argument in the real world. The lawsuit also challenges Josh Shapiro's executive order from September 2023 requiring automatic voter registration, noting the proposal failed to pass the General Assembly on multiple occasions. So they want the sort of voter registration that you have in a place like California, where you go to get a driver's license. And you can do this, by the way, as an illegal alien. You can go get a driver's license and they automatically register you to vote with that information. Now, that doesn't constitute a legitimate voter registration, but it would have to be challenged over its legitimacy to be removed. Now it's already in the system. California would simply say, well, that's not an eligible voter, but it's in the system. We will purge that out when the time comes. Well, in the meantime, they will also send out ballots to every registered voter. And then if those ballots get harvested and cast and counted, well, those are part of the election now. And unless they are challenged all the way to the end, and you would have to be able to review it at every single step, well, that vote is gonna count. That is the system as they have used it for years now. So we'll see what these challenges bring. Now, along the same lines, there was an interesting article yesterday at a Substack called The American Discerner. This is tomwigand.substack.com. The headline, Election Steal 2024. Could CISA and the Uniparty be preparing to flip the script on election security? Might CISA declare that the 2024 election was the, quote, least secure in American history, end quote, while still circling the wagons to protect Dominion, ES&S, etc.? He presents an interesting idea and an interesting argument here. I encourage you to have a read for yourself. I'm going to jump down toward the end, though. He writes, in recent weeks, we've seen the Democrats openly talking about refusing to certify the election if Trump wins. At the same time, quote unquote, Republicans are starting to announce their very unusual early retirement before the election. Ken Buck and Mike Gallagher, as of this writing, consider the likelihood none of these events are unrelated. That whether through bribes or blackmail, the Democrats and or deep state intelligence community has identified weak and vulnerable Republicans and, albeit separated by a couple weeks between each so as not to be too obvious, is having them, quote unquote, retire so as to flip control of the House to the Democrats before the election. This would immediately end all Biden impeachment efforts, all other investigations, and leave a Democrat majority to certify, or not, the results of the 2024 election, and perhaps select the next president because the election results can't be certified. Can't be certified. Well, various possibilities, or should we say elements of contingency plan Bs and so on, present themselves. Presumably, they're still hoping that lawfare against President Trump, including a potential jail sentence, will get him to throw in the towel and or disillusion his supporters, enabling the classic election fraud mechanisms to put Biden or his designated successor over the top. If not, flood the voter registration rolls at the last minute with names of millions of illegal aliens, doing so when it's too late for election integrity forces to counter. This providing the inventory for machines and mules to inject votes as needed. And this, again, is a strategy that they have consistently used. Flood in all of these voter registrations. This is why they love same-day registration. Get all of that into the system at the last minute. Vote all of those registrations. And in the ensuing days and weeks, you create the ballots that will support all of those fake votes if anyone is able to force the election officials in that state to actually produce evidence of their results. No one is ever able to check. We saw how much lawfare was waged in an attempt to stop anyone from checking to see whether the reported results accurately reflected the will and intent of the American voter. Now, the only place they were able to thoroughly check at all was in Maricopa County, and we still haven't actually seen the final report on the Maricopa County forensic audit. We are told by the mainstream media that the audit actually proved Joe Biden won by more, but absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. The report showed that in a multitude of ways, the election was totally uncertifiable. The idea that Joe Biden actually achieved more votes after that audit is only plausible while recognizing that it counts votes that are not proven to be real, lawful American votes, which are the only ones that can and should count, and the only ones that are actually certifiable without yourself committing fraud. Back to Wygand. Note that, presumably, touchscreen voting entirely eliminates the need for mules and fraudulent ballots. For at least in theory, everything from registration to voting, the entire voter transaction, can be executed electronically, violating the aforementioned separation of duties principle. Ponder how many the 10 million plus illegals shipped in by the Biden-Harris junta have already been processed through motor voter registration. And those illegitimate registrations are being held in a reserve inventory to be injected into voter registration rolls at an opportune time when and if needed. And he is right. That is absolutely a possibility. And if somehow Trump still prevails over all that fraud, could it be that CISA, as a plan C, would then declare that the injection of registrations that it enabled in the first place was because of a cyber attack by the Russians or whoever, and that the election results are irreparably corrupted? In other words, CISA would flip the 2020 script on its head and declare that 2024 was the least secure election in history, and by doing so would set the stage for refusal to certify a Trump victory and for a Democrat-controlled House to select the next president. Yes, they would rather maintain the illusion of free and fair elections as much as possible. The easier it is to then counter with assertions of election deniers peddling conspiracy theories. And a selection of a president by the House after an uncertifiable election will make such refutations much harder to make stick. In fact, an absolute majority may then red pill and realize that the game is rigged. I think we already have that. For the perpetrators of such, this is far from ideal, but if you were one of them, would you rather deal with that or with eventually being asked if you want a blindfold and a last cigarette? He concludes, of course, I can't say if any of the above is actually in the works, but judge for yourself if such is plausible or other things along those lines. After our experience in the 2020 elections, how could we not consider such possibilities? And he is exactly right. And it is important, I agree, to consider those possibilities. Now, people often react badly even to the mention of these possibilities. They say that that is blackpilling, which is funny because they are claiming that the people blackpilling are also the ones who they claim are spreading hopium. It's like, make a decision, please, about which of these errors we are generally making. You might consider that if you're accusing us of both of those things, maybe we are just going right down the middle, and that faith and optimism are possible. At the same time, we are exercising extreme skepticism and trying to speculate about all the worst possible outcomes so that we can attempt to avoid them. We have to try to look ahead to know where we want to go and where we don't want to go. Now, with all that in mind, there was a very entertaining piece in Rolling Stone over the weekend that I will now share with you. It's written by a communist named Axios Subsang. He is a very serious intellectual on Twitter, formerly of The Daily Beast and Mother Jones. This is who Mike Lindell often refers to as Swin, one of the fake news reporters who often covers Mike Lindell. He used to have a podcast with a guy named Will Sommer, who was The Daily Beast's main reporter on the QAnon conspiracy theorists. Will Sommer does that very, very important reporting on the serious threat of right-wing extremism. Axios Subsang was also the person at Rolling Stone who was writing all of those articles, I don't know, maybe last summer, last spring, about Donald Trump and the return of the federal death penalty in public executions. I wonder why they're so concerned about that. And isn't it weird that Donald Trump reinstituted those while he's also so indicted? I mean, isn't he worried that he's going to be the one who is publicly executed? You'd think he'd be horrified, what with all of this powerful government apparatus bearing down on him. It's almost like the whole thing is fake. The headline last year in Rolling Stone, February 14th, 2023, Trump plans to bring back firing squads, group executions if he retakes White House. That was actually a follow-up to an even bigger feature in Rolling Stone by Asewen Subsang and Patrick Reese. Trump's killing spree, the inside story of his race to execute every prisoner he could. So that is the level of Trump derangement for Asewen Subsang. I covered these articles in a podcast last year from February 15th, 2023. The podcast episode is called What Killing Spree? And I remember having a lot of fun with that one. So if you're looking for something to fill the time on a day that I might not put out a podcast or over the weekend, go check that one out. What Killing Spree from last February. You can just use the search feature on the Substack. I'm your moderator.substack.com. Subsang also published a major feature in Rolling Stone in December of last year on the 8th. Inside Trump's plot to corrupt the 2024 election with garbage data. So in December of last year, before the fake primaries had even started, Donald Trump was already plotting to steal the election, according to Rolling Stone. But let's get up to the present day. This is the headline from yesterday. Biden is building a superstructure to stop Trump from stealing the election. And this is one of those articles where you're like, wait a second. Are we just actually replaying 2020? There are like new versions of the story, but we're hitting all the same narrative points, just kind of in reverse. We're being told right now about this effort to build up this massive system to prevent Donald Trump from stealing the election. It's not to enable the uniparty to rig and steal elections, not just with Biden versus Trump, but all across the board. It's not for that. It's so that Donald Trump won't steal elections. And so let's just remember what Joe Biden had to say about this in 2020.
We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics. Folks, we got a lot of work to do. I need you to get me elected. I need you once I'm elected. No longer just who gets to vote or making it easy for eligible people to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote and whether your vote counts at all. It's about who gets to count the votes, whether they should count at all. Who gets to count the vote, count the vote, count the vote. It's about election subversion, not just whether or not people get to vote. Who counts the vote?
So the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in history. And of course, that is absolutely true. I've said on this podcast many times, and in many places beyond this podcast, they control every element of the system. They control the voter registry. They control where the ballots are sent. They know where the ballots are sent, so they know how to go pick up those ballots to the extent they even bother sending them. Why would you actually bother sending them? If you know 3,000 ballots are going to a vacant lot and you're going to send a ballot harvester to pick up those 3,000 ballots, why even bother sending them? I mean, I guess they can do it for the proof of them being sent in the first place. But are they really worried about that element being checked? They don't allow any of the elements prior to that being checked. So what would even be the point of protecting that level? But leaving that aside, assuming that they do send out these ballots, they know who is going to get them, and they run the organization of people who will go to get them so they can target where those ballots that will not otherwise be picked up, where those ballots will be. Then, of course, they can cast those ballots. They're in control of counting those ballots. They're in control of the reported results. They have people in place to certify those results, and then they have a massive system of lawfare set up to make sure that those results will not and cannot be overturned or challenged in any meaningful way. The system has been designed to allow for exactly this. So, of course, they have the most extensive and inclusive election fraud organization in history. So let's get to Rolling Stone. Biden is building a superstructure to stop Trump from stealing the election. This might as well be appearing in the spring of 2020. For years, Donald Trump has made it abundantly clear that if he doesn't win the 2024 presidential election, he is willing to cheat and steal it. Now, that is just blatant dishonesty in the first sentence. Donald Trump at no time has said that he is willing to cheat and steal the election. Donald Trump doesn't have to cheat and steal to win an election. A fair election will be dominated by Donald Trump and America first. And by the way, the proof of Asawin Subsang's claim right there that Donald Trump has said he will cheat and steal the election is his own article from 3 weeks ago titled "The Supreme Court is Tilting 2024 in Trump's Favor, One Decision at a Time." So that is how Trump is cheating and stealing it. Sounds like Asawin Subsang is committed to tearing down our democracy. Since President Joe Biden's inaugural address, according to sources with intimate knowledge of the situation, Biden and his inner circle have been drawing up meticulous plans and creating a large legal network focused on wargaming a close election finish in which the former president and Republican Party launched a scorched earth, big lie fueled crusade. Well, that sounds exactly like the Transition Integrity Project, which they did in 2020 and which Time magazine immortalized Molly Ball talking about the cabal that fortified the 2020 election. Long before Trump began leading in battleground state polling and years before he was declared the 2024 candidate, the ex-president and many of his influential allies were already busy plotting ways to tilt the election in his favor. These years-long efforts, conducted both secretly and out in the open, have already yielded tangible results for Trump and the conservative election denier movement. These wide-ranging operations have alarmed the Democrat Party elite, who aren't just worried about Biden's sagging poll numbers. Numerous Democrat lawmakers, operatives, Biden campaign advisors, and administration officials tell Rolling Stone that if the president does ultimately beat Trump this November, the election will be exceedingly close. Oh, if Biden wins, it will be exceedingly close? Why aren't they saying that Biden will win in an extraordinary blowout, and that is why Donald Trump has to cheat so much? They're trying to tell us that Biden would win by a very small margin in a legitimate election, but that Donald Trump intends to steal it? That's weird when the other side is claiming if we have a legitimate election, Donald Trump is going to win by an enormous amount. Which side has faith in the American people and faith in the system? There is no actual Democrat majority in this country. Has there ever been? Over the past year, Team Biden has been conducting war games, crafting complex legal strategies, and devoting extensive resources to prepare for, as one former senior Biden administration official puts it, all hell breaks loose scenarios. The preparations include planning for a contingency in which Biden's margin of victory is so razor thin that Trump and the GOP launch a tidal wave of legal challenges and political maneuvers to rerun his 2020 election strategy, declare victory anyways, and try to will it into existence. Anyways, huh? It's weird that a very serious intellectual, a well-educated intellectual like Asawin Subsang, would say things like anyways. President Biden has been worried for a while now that Donald Trump is going to try to steal the election if it's very close on election day, says a source familiar with Biden's thinking. So again, just anybody. Asawin Subsang knows who that person is. You're just not allowed to. If that ends up being the case, we are also expecting the Republican Party to go into overdrive to help him steal it. We are continuing to build out the infrastructure to ensure that doesn't happen again. If President Biden wins and Trump and MAGA Republicans try to confuse everyone and sow chaos, oh yeah, it's going to be so confusing. 85% of the nation will know that Joe Biden has no chance to win a legitimate election. So when they announce Joe Biden as the winner in a very, very close election, Trump is going to try to confuse everybody. After the 2020 race was called for Biden, Trump and much of the GOP embarked on a sprawling campaign. A blitz of lawsuits, rabid conspiracy theories, attempts to block certification, and slates of fake electors to nullify Biden's clear win. This, again, is from a uniparty regime propagandist. What a preposterous statement. After the 2020 race was called for Biden, Trump and much of the GOP embarked on a sprawling campaign, a blitz of lawsuits, rabid conspiracy theories, attempts to block certification, and slates of fake electors to nullify Biden's clear win. We had a discussion on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night. We actually played that Bill Maher clip I shared earlier, and we talked about whether or not these people actually believe the things they're saying. I am of the mind that they do actually believe these things, and it's because I know a lot of people like those members of that panel. And I've actually spent some time with Bill Maher before. I've had a drink with Bill Maher and discussed some of these things. He is actually more like that in person. He believes that he is one of the smartest people, that he is absolutely right about all this stuff, and that he also has these interesting, unique takes. He thinks he is objective. He is fair and balanced. He calls it like he sees it, and he knows what needs to be done. He really does believe all the bullshit he says. And I believe that Asean Subsang also believes all of this bullshit, that Joe Biden really had a clear win and that everything else is just a conspiracy theory. And they repeat all of this stuff so many times within that echo chamber, and it echoes back to them. And they're all like, yep, everybody knows that what I'm saying is true. And then they begin to make these statements even more extreme. He's not saying, while there was some question about the outcome of certain races in 2020, the court sided with Joe Biden. And even Trump's own attorney general said he hadn't seen enough evidence of widespread fraud that could overturn the election. He's not making the mild case. He's making the extreme case. Joe Biden had a clear win. That is absurd, but let's continue. This culminated in the deadly January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, which Trump instigated, and led to years of criminal investigations and various indictments, as well as the mainstreaming of the MAGA election denial movement. The efforts to overturn the election were unsuccessful, largely because Biden had won too many battleground states, unlike when the 2000 presidential race came down to the single state of Florida, and the Republican Party was able to successfully halt the recount of an extremely close vote. Asean Subsang sounds like a 2000 election denier. This time around, the race could be much closer, and Trump's efforts appear significantly more organized. He also has more of the party behind him and his anti-democratic election lies than he had during the last presidential election. If the 2024 election margins end up being wafer thin, that level of institutional backing could, of course, redound to Trump's benefit. Top officials in both the Trump and Biden camps are expecting an uncomfortably tight election outcome in November. Sources in both campaigns have told Rolling Stone on numerous occasions over the past year. Advisors to both candidates say they expect the race will turn on a margin of just tens of thousands of votes in a handful of key battleground states, if not a single state. One Trump advisor says that they had privately told the ex-president and presumptive 2024 GOP nominee to anticipate an electoral, quote, knife fight to the death, end quote, on and likely in the wake of Election Day. Team Biden's in-house counsels and network of outside lawyers are currently preparing legal strategies for scenarios involving recounts that would make, in the words of one Biden official, quote, make Florida in 2000 look like child's play. Subsang needs a better editor. But what does it mean that Biden is preparing all of these legal strategies? How does he know how Donald Trump is going to attack various methods of regime fraud? Donald Trump doesn't control the election apparatus. The Uniparty controls the election apparatus. So Donald Trump is not going to be able to control the apparatus and give himself a win. That's not possible. They say Trump is going to steal it after the fact by challenging all these elements of Joe Biden's win. But again, Trump doesn't control the apparatus. Biden controls the apparatus. So how will Trump attack Biden's control of the apparatus and what that apparatus has done and accomplished? How would they prepare legal strategies to deal with those attacks? Well, the only way that they would know how Trump might attack them, thus allowing them to prepare specific legal strategies for those attacks, is by them knowing how they intend to steal the election. Again, it's the same people in control of every element. So now they are preparing that lawfare apparatus, that last step to keep the fraudulent outcome in place. And they are designing specific legal strategies in order to counteract Trump's legal strategies that will be based on the specific methods the uniparty uses to steal the elections. They are able to do this because they know how they intend to operate the system. It is an admission of the fact that they intend to steal the election using all the means that they have stolen prior elections and adding new methods on top of those. Sources in and around the president's legal and political operations say the Biden campaign's current wargaming is informed by questions aides asked themselves in the wake of the 2020 election. What if there's a rematch in 4 years with Donald Trump? What do we do if Joe Biden wins and Trump tries to steal the election again? Oh, yes, they've been thinking about it the whole time. Biden world spent a lot of time pondering such a scenario even before the 2020 election. So they were thinking about 2024 even before the 2020 election. These people are brilliant and definitely not trying to rig the game for the foreseeable future, which is whatever length of time there is between right now and when we never have elections again. And Klaus Schwab himself has said that we don't need elections anywhere in the world. Based on the data they have on people, they just know what the people want. So, of course, they're not going to actually look at that and show us the data. They're going to tell us we understand that all of these people, they really value democracy. And they want to do something about climate change. And they want us to do something about hate speech. And they want us to do something about racism. And they just go right on down the list. Yep, the people are behind us on absolutely all of that. And since we already know that, why would we bother continuing to have elections? We could just govern these people by AI. But back to Axios Subsang. In the months leading up to November 2020, Trump offered repeated public signals that he would try to delegitimize any outcome in which he lost the election. As the threats mounted, Biden's campaign brass began preemptively working through different nightmare scenarios. That prep work accelerated in the final weeks of the campaign as an armada of lawyers, numbering in the hundreds, sketched out various unconventional scenarios in which the then president tried to cling to power in the face of defeat, according to current and former senior Biden campaign officials. Democratic aides walked through a range of authoritarian possibilities, including one scenario in which Trump called out the National Guard either as a show of force or in an attempt to enforce his fictitious victory, the sources say. Another scenario involved game plans for how to handle Trump refusing to leave the White House the day of Biden's inauguration, even if the swearing in had already concluded. And it sounds like Axios Subsang is trying to make up for all of those damaging stories that came out on Friday. The oversight letter sent by Pete Sessions to Rosa Brooks at Georgetown. She was involved in the Transition Integrity Project. Now they're going to have a look into that. Well, you got to cover up that problem by telling everybody in the pages of Rolling Stone that actually that organization was very important in 2020. That organization actually might have saved us from street violence or potentially even civil war. They did all the right things in the aftermath of the 2020 election, or at least the announcement of the results of the election. And not only is Swin covering up for the Transition Integrity Project, he is also reframing the claims about Donald Trump supplying the National Guard, making them ready, allowing for Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Muriel Bowser to decide whether or not they wanted those troops there to protect the Capitol and Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Had they not refused to do so, we might have totally avoided all of the chaos of the very violent insurrection. Axios Subsang is just running interference for narratives that are falling apart. He is reframing and trying to provide support for these crumbling narratives. Let's continue. Biden HQ and the lawyers were essentially preparing for every insane scenario that anyone could think of, so that the campaign wouldn't be stuck in neutral if the worst actually transpired, said one attorney familiar with the extensive 2020 wargaming. Even then, I'm not sure everybody was predicting just how crazy it would become and what Trump would actually do. Oh yeah, he actually just employed every legal route possible to challenge the fraudulent outcomes of the stolen 2020 election, the usurpation of the federal government of the United States, or at least the public disclosure of that usurpation. Any attempt by Trump to try and undermine the 2024 election would likely look different than 2020, if only because he lacks the legal authority and access to federal resources he enjoyed as president. Still, Team Biden has been planning for years, sketching out what Trump could do as the leader of the GOP, and has partnered with the Democrat National Committee and a vast network of liberal attorneys and legal groups to conduct similar doomsday-style wargaming. One swing state Democrat election official involved with these efforts refers to it as a quote-unquote superstructure of various legal teams and liberal operatives who are, quote, going to fight Team Trump and election deniers on all fronts and let them have it from all sides if MAGA wants to tear down our democracy, end quote. According to two Biden campaign officials and two other sources with knowledge of the operation, draft pleadings and legal motions for all kinds of possible Trump-related emergencies are already written and at the ready. Now, you couldn't possibly do that unless you have some understanding of how Donald Trump's side is going to go after various election irregularities and accuse the system set up to enable election theft and the people operating that system of creating those irregularities. You actually do have to be the one cheating in that scenario, knowing how you intend to cheat. That's the only way you could know how they're going to respond and accuse you of cheating, which is the only thing that could enable you to plan a response to their response and to have it already written out 7.5 months prior to the election. That should not be something that is possible. Let's keep going. In critical swing states such as Georgia, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, Team Biden is regularly in contact with an array of outside counsels and local law firms that have been retained to actively monitor what is happening on the ground, including with regards to the activism of election-denying Trump allies. Biden World's closely held list of nightmare scenarios in which Democratic legal teams would have to battle it out tooth and nail with Republican counterparts before, during, or after Election Day has grown, quote unquote, comically long, says one source with direct knowledge of the matter. Biden campaign officials and other Democrats familiar with the topic tell Rolling Stone that a key concern, for which step-by-step game planning has already begun, is how to robustly respond if Trump and other leading Republicans try to engineer another January 6th style power grab. So you see that? No matter how many people go on the cable news and no matter how many articles get written about it, Liz Cheney herself has gone on cable news and said flat out that she intends to support Democrats in the fall because she wants a Democrat House so that they can deem Trump ineligible even after he wins, potentially. They are going after all manner of January 6th challenges to those electors and accusing Donald Trump of doing it, simply so that they can claim they're just responding to his response. They're just trying to be prepared for him attempting to usurp the presidency and the government. And so all these plans that they are actively writing for their actual usurpation, they're all being framed as a response to Donald Trump's attempted usurpation, despite the fact that Donald Trump does not control any aspect of the election fraud apparatus and, as far as we're told by these people, doesn't control any aspect of the government. In these internal war games among Biden world and Democrat attorneys in key states, this kind of January 6th sequel has included scripts in which House Republicans or state officials refuse to certify a Biden victory, an act that prominent GOP politicians, including on Capitol Hill, have publicly dangled as an option. And of course, Asawin Subsang links to proof of that claim, and that proof is an article from Rolling Stone about how Elise Stefanik said that she would not have done what Mike Pence did on January 6th of 2021. That alone qualifies as, quote, prominent GOP politicians publicly dangling that option. One quote from one person means that is what's happening. as if Elise Stefanik is even in position to be able to do that. And of course, she isn't. She is just a congresswoman from New York. And yes, she is in GOP House leadership, but she's not the vice president. And so it doesn't matter what she would have done in Mike Pence's position. But Aswin Subsang's not concerned with that. He's just concerned with making it look like the GOP is actually plotting the coup. A spokesperson for the Democrat National Committee tells Rolling Stone that the National Party is also setting aside tens of millions of dollars in a robust voter protection program to safeguard the rights of voters to make their voices heard against relentless attacks from Donald Trump and the GOP. Utter nonsense. That is all a quote from this spokesperson for the DNC. Continuing. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign and the RNC have invested in an army of conspiratorial, election-denying legal staff to undermine our elections and make it harder for Americans' ballots to be counted. We won't let Republicans get away with these baseless attacks on our democracy, and we will continue to use every tool at our disposal to strengthen our democracy as MAGA extremists attempt to tear it down. Our democracy, our democracy. That only means the Uniparty and their election fraud apparatus worldwide. It is the global regime's grip on control across the world. That is what our democracy means. It has absolutely nothing to do with the constitutional republic known as the United States of America. The constitutional republic, by the way, that has been usurped again and again and again in cycles for the last 250 years. Hopefully, we are the generation that puts that to an end and restores this constitutional republic. But let's close it out with Aswin Subsang. Of course, if much of the current national and swing state polling holds, Trump could defeat his successor outright in a 2024 rematch. However, that is almost irrelevant to Trump and his MAGA brain trust's goals of cementing their heads I win, tails you lose philosophy of election administration. And once again, he links to another piece of Rolling Stone conspiracy theory and propaganda, this one from March 17th, 2024, by Justin Glowy. Potential 2024 chaos, election deniers refusing to certify results. So just conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory in the pages of Rolling Stone. Mis, dis, and malinformation being spread far and wide in the pages of this publication. Why aren't any of the legacy social media apps springing into action to protect us from this mis, dis, and malinformation? Trump, after all, has continued to falsely claim that the 2016 presidential race was somehow rigged in Democrat Hillary Clinton's favor. And that was the election he won. And thanks for mentioning that, Aswin Subsang. That is a great reminder at the end of this article that it isn't only, as they claim, elections are only stolen when you lose. That is what they tell us, that all of the Republican wins anywhere, those count. And that means that Republicans, when they claim that elections are stolen, they're just lying. They're mad that they didn't win those elections. Now, all of this is stuff that can only be believed by people who do not understand our election apparatus at all and who have never checked. And of course, none of these Biden voters who are still Biden voters have ever checked. The members of the GOP establishment, Con Inc. media, they haven't checked either. They don't want to check because the Uniparty's control over the election apparatus is what keeps all of these people in power. It keeps them accumulating wealth. It is their system, their democracy, and if that ever falls away, they are toast. And let's conclude today with this piece from Jim Vandehei and Mike Allen of Axios. These guys are considered like the prestige level of mainstream media. Shards of glass inside media's 12 splintering realities. You can't understand November's election or America itself without reckoning with how our media attention has shattered into a bunch of misshapen pieces. Think of it as the shards of glass phenomenon. Not long ago, we all saw news and information through a few common windows, TVs, newspapers, cable. Now we find it in scattered chunks that match our age, habits, politics, and passions. Traditional media, at least as a center of dominant power, is dead. Social media, as its replacement for news in the internet era, is declining in dominance. America is splintering into more than a dozen news bubbles based on ideology, wealth, jobs, age, and location. This means where you get your news, the voices you trust, and even the topics and cultural figures you follow could be wholly different from the person sitting next to you. Oh no, we all might have different experiences. Then we won't all do the same thing at the same time, as their entire organization is designed to accomplish. They want everyone on the same page, believing all the same things and prepared to react the same ways to the same stimulus. So when they give us a very deadly pandemic, we all agree that we should lock down forever if we have to. We all put on our masks and we do whatever the TV says forever. When they finally grace us with a vaccine, we all inject it, and we encourage medical segregation for anyone who doesn't. That's the sort of thing they're able to accomplish if everyone is on the same page, and that is what they want back. They can't imagine controlling everybody in a situation where one person believes one thing and the person sitting next to them believes something entirely different. It's like they don't care about individualism at all, even though they talk about it all the time. They tell you how wonderful it is to be unique. They want you to be unique, just like everybody else. But also, everybody needs to believe the exact same things. Otherwise, the system just breaks down. So instead of Red America and Blue America, we'll have a dozen or more Americas and realities. This will make understanding public opinion and finding common agreement even more complex and elusive. Now, this is a very interesting insight. One would be more impressed if they had made it years ago, since it's been this way for a while. One would also be more impressed if these people actually implemented this understanding into their thinking instead of pretending that there is actually one reality, and it's the one that all of fake news and everyone who follows fake news agrees to be true. It's such a ridiculous idea that they don't even bother stating it because no one would ever consider it. All of these people, the cases they make, everything assumes that everyone believes that the mainstream understanding of what's happening, the understanding derived from the central narrative, from the authoritative source, all of that must be true. Otherwise, everything else these people say is completely preposterous. And now you get to the point where they actually admit, oh, there are actually different layers of reality here. People no longer believe the false reality as projected, which is not to say that most people don't believe in various false realities in full or in part. And that, again, is true for all of us. Anyone who was involved in any way in the party of false decorum, myself included, and myself in particular, by the way, needs to spend their lifetime committed to recognizing those instances when the party of false decorum dynamic and understanding begins to show its head. But that'll be a conversation for another day. Let's get back to this article from Axios. Disclaimer. No, this doesn't mean the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or CNN are dead. It just means their influence will wane with most people in the other bubbles. Nor does it mean Facebook and Twitter will lose relevance. They simply will be influential in tighter bubbles. Gosh, you guys are really ahead of the game in understanding the information space. To help get your head around this shift, we'll generalize in describing some of today's most powerful bubbles. We talk to influencers left, right, and center, media executives, political operatives, C-suite executives, and more. Here is what we found. And I'm sure that they have talked to genuinely independent people from all of these circles and these groups of influencers. They didn't just ask all their normie friends, some of whom claim to be representing the right. So let's go through the breakdown of their groups. Number one, the Musketeers. Oh, gosh, these guys are so clever. This is a fast-growing, mostly male group who feed off Twitter, podcasts, especially All In and Joe Rogan, and follow independent reporters led by Barry Weiss through social media and newsletters. The All In podcast, of course, is the David Sachs podcast with Jason Calacanis. That is just Twitter content. I genuinely have no idea what these authors are talking about, that they actually believe that is sparking a movement in thought. I cannot see that at all. They also, of course, portray Barry Weiss as an independent journalist. That is obviously not true. Her news organization, the Free Press, is very clearly an info op designed to create a new mainstream media, and she is extraordinarily well funded. Instagrammers, this is number 2. This is mostly young to middle-aged women in college and the professional class. They're very engaged with this more visual form of journalism and gravitate toward new influential voices in the creator economy, including Jessica Yellen. New Not Noise, that's her podcast, I guess. Betches News. That was a social media influencer project that's been going on for years. It used to be devoted to internet humor, and now they are pitching this organization as a mainstream source of information for Instagram women. They also mention Emily in Your Phone and Sharon Says So. Apparently, this is where the dumbest, wokest women on earth get their political understanding of the world. It is no surprise that this is the strongest group of Biden supporters remaining. TikTok kids. This is number 3. This is where most kids get most of their information about the world and hot news topics. They scroll fast and furious through pictures and micro bursts of information and trust people most parents have never heard of. Think Mr. Beast, Addison Rae, and Zach King. K. 4. New age grandmas. Consumers of news on Facebook have been trending older. Yes, Facebook has deliberately de-emphasized news over the past 3 years, emphasizing what Meta Global Affairs President Nick Clegg calls, quote, babies, barbecues, and bar mitzvahs, end quote. But a lot remains. There were also stories over the weekend about how Instagram is deprioritizing political content. It is basically defaulting to an option where political content is minimized in people's feeds. They have to go find that setting and turn it off themselves. Otherwise, they simply remove political content. And they say, our users, they don't really want to see political content. Let's just get rid of all of it. Then we cannot be accused of censoring certain political viewpoints, despite the fact that they are still censoring. Now, at what point is it better for a regime to censor all political content rather than targeted censoring of their political opponents? Well, that's when their political opponents begin to dominate the conversation, when there's not much coming back on their own side, supporting and defending their positions. They would rather have it all gone at that point. Consider if the political content coming out is 90% harmful to your political position and 10% helpful to your political position, which strategy is better to deal with the fact that you need to stop the flow of information from that 90% viewpoint? You can either attempt to censor all of that 90% and hope that no one notices and leaves the platform, or you can censor 100%, knowing that you're only losing your 10% factor. That is totally a worthwhile trade-off for them, and it's one they think they will be able to sell to people. Number 5, right-wing grandpas. Senior citizens, especially men, still flock to Fox News, especially in prime time, and especially around popular personalities. They would have been big Rush Limbaugh fans back in the 1990s. So we're being told that this brilliant assessment of the media landscape and how it matches to different demographics, this is what we're actually dealing with. All of these different demos have their own special information environment, their own narrative devoted to just them. It sounds like what they're describing is the central narrative being marketed to people with all sorts of differing political opinions and life situations, just as I've been talking about for years. All of these outlets they have mentioned so far push the same central narrative. They push the same underlying events as true and then give you the options for different analysis, all of it existing within that central narrative bubble. Number 6, MAGA mind melders. The new conservative ecosystem would seem like a distant planet to anyone whose habits were formed pre-Trump. People like Charlie Kirk, massive because he's multi-platform, Jack Posobiec and Mike Cernovich are dominant voices. That's, again, not really true. Then there are folks who are taken seriously only in Trump world, like Laura Loomer and Alex Brusewitz, but can really move the needle there. No one rivals Tucker Carlson with the base, even without his Fox News platform. Don Jr. is second with his massive X, Facebook, and Instagram engagement. He's the meme lord of the right, a MAGA insider told us. Steve Bannon's War Room remains a juggernaut. Breitbart's Matt Boyle is a go-to newsbreaker on the right. Plus, there's a potent crew of video clip guys. And they link to Benny Johnson's Twitter account. Liberal warriors. This is number 7. Think of Rachel Maddow as patron saint of this block, hence her sky-high ratings. This crowd feeds off the New York Times, especially opinion pieces, and prestige magazines, especially The Atlantic and The New Yorker. They were once addicted to Twitter, but left or lessened their dependency after Musk turned it into X. So these are the people who like the censored information environment that they were accustomed to. They don't want any interference. They want to feel like they are right. They have always been right. And the smartest, most credible, most reputable people agree with them that they have always been right and could never be anything but right based on who they are. Elite power consumers. And get ready for this. This is the Axios base. Oh, that's so sad. These guys think their readership constitute the elite power consumer. These are mainly college-educated, ambitious professionals. We estimate 25 million to 45 million nationally, who seek out news near daily, partly for passion and partly for professional enhancement. This group is most likely to overlap with other bubbles and lap up Morning Joe. These power users are huge fans of newsletters, which in some respects mimic in shrunken form newspapers, a beginning and end, punctuated with pictures and visuals. LinkedIn is a hot, if still small, pipeline for content. You have to love how they're talking about all of these different information demographics and their consumption, and then they immediately let you know that so many of these demographics actually overlap and are just the same thing. You also have to love how Axios describes its own audience as these wannabe elites, these ambitious elites, and then admits that they spend all their time watching Morning Joe. So congrats on self-owning Axios. Why would you want to brag that you share an audience with Morning Joe, the dumbest show in the history of television? Oh, yeah, sorry. It's because Jim Vandehei and Mike Allen go on Morning Joe all the time. Number 9, the financiers. This is the base of the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, especially Squawk Box, and Dealbook, the newsletter by New York Times and Squawk star Andrew Ross Sorkin. Lots of rich, white, older, East Coast or big city professionals live here. And it's hilarious. They have all the same opinions as the elite power consumers and the liberal warriors and the Instagram white women, and actually most of those musketeers, at least the people who watch the David Sachs podcast. That is like the edgy version of the rest of this center-left, in quotes, mainstream media. Number 10, nichers. What? Why'd you say nichers? Okay. Can't imagine what would happen if someone on the Trump team wrote nichers. These are professionals who exploit the abundance of high-quality, in-the-weeds news about their job, industry, or specific role. The internet is nirvana for ones who know who to follow, what newsletters to get, and what specialty pubs to buy. Specialty publication, I guess. Pubs is what they call it in the inner circle. That is the lingo, the jargon of elite news consumers, people who watch Morning Joe, you understand? This is often a subset of elites. Reddit is a hotbed. WhatsApp is also a shard bubble. A huge number of people, especially immigrants and people with family and friends in other countries, get news and memes from WhatsApp groups, which can be a big conduit of misinformation. Whoops, those darn nichers. Number 11, the emerging majority. What? Didn't you already note that 25 to 45 million people were in Axios' audience? This is crazy. There are upwardly mobile, college-educated Latinos and Black Americans who no longer have Black or bilingual publications to read. What? They've turned their attention to trusted journalists in mainstream outlets such as NPR TV critic Eric Deggans and LA Times Metro columnist Gustavo Arellano to make sense of the world. Also, they turn to Black and Latino influencers around tech, Marcus Brownlee, financial planning, Yanely Espinal, and fashion, Black and Fashion Council. You see that? There just aren't any publications left for Black and Latino Americans to read, so they turn to NPR and a few Black and Latino subject-oriented sources. And of course, they are turning to sources in the center or center left. They're not moving toward MAGA, except wait, yes, they are. Black and Latino Americans are moving quickly toward MAGA. That's the Democrat base, and it's collapsing. And we're being told by the news destination of the ambitious elite that actually they're just listening to more NPR lately. 12. Passivists. Clever. That's almost as clever as nichers. On most days, this might be the biggest group. It's people either too busy or too disinterested in news to hunt for it. They bump into it, often accidentally, as they chat or buy things or scroll through fun stuff. What in the world are these morons talking about? They didn't even define 12 groups. All they did was create these little theoretical bubbles of people and tell them, hey, here's your best news source. Why don't you check this one out? This is what people like you are doing. This is like an ad for all of these news sources. Steve Bannon is like the only person in this entire list who consistently goes against the central narrative. I mean, Matt Boyle at Breitbart, they dispute some of the central narrative, but not all of it, not even close to all of it. Tucker Carlson just is a mainstream media figure. And then he's talking about guys like Mike Cernovich. Mike Cernovich is a moron. Mike Cernovich was advertising to people that they should mask and get vaccinated. So they basically break down the country into these 12 demographics and then essentially say that all 12 of these demographics are still completely committed to news outlets, sources of information within that central narrative bubble. Bannon is the only one who consistently exists outside that. And I guess you have to mention him just so that the article is credible at all. And I should mention, looking over this again, that Laura Loomer, Alex Brusewitz, and Donald Trump Jr. also obviously exist outside of that central narrative bubble. But the point remains for the rest of it. This is an advertisement for the central narrative by those whose profession is disseminating the central narrative. They have the underlying concept correct that the media environment has been splintered, but they're not being honest in any way about what that new media environment looks like. They are still just describing the contours of that central narrative bubble. And they are still expressing the same strategy, which is to have one underlying story. Now, that story doesn't have to be attached to reality so long as all of the purveyors of information agree that it's true and that the audiences for those purveyors of information continue to trust them so that the people who make up those audiences also believe that same underlying reality is true, while again understanding that it doesn't have to be true in order for them to say it. The underlying reality that would exist in Reality Prime does not have to exist in order for them to pitch it and for millions of people to believe it. They are just branding it and directing it and targeting different demographics with that branding, with the version of the story they get told. And they make this happen in the same way that the NFL just found a way to appeal to preteen girls across the country last season by having Taylor Swift date a football player. They'll figure out what you are interested in and then prepare content for you that leads you back to believing whatever it is they want you to believe. I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's happening!